Hello. Hello there.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Hello, everyone. How y'all doing? I'm Jojo.
I'm Teresa.
And welcome to the ServerlessDays Hamburg. So to get ready for the conference on 1st and 2nd of October, we are hosting this online meetup. So we can get to know a little bit of the community, spread a little bit the word about the conference, and hear an amazing talk from Marek. So I hope you enjoy this evening. Cool. So I'm Jojo. I'm quite new to the community, actually. So Teresa and Hendrik, they asked me to help the ServerlessDays conference that's going to happen in October. I moved to Berlin recently in January this year, so I'm pretty new to the country as well. But I'm very keen to help around and to know and help build the serverless community. So I'm very, very happy, very thrilled to be able to be around here. And so I'm going to show a little bit about the conference. I have a tiny little presentation here. Just a quick second. I'm going to share my screen. And there we go. Cool. Yeah, so we are also testing all these tools. So yeah, this is the ServerlessDays the Hamburg 2020. So this is the meetup version. So of course there's a serverless Hamburg meetup as well, physical location, but it's not happening because of the Corona pandemic. So we are bringing the ServerlessDays community online in this meetup today. If you wanna participate in the conference, you can go to this website and sign up. It's gonna be on the, yeah, there's a link here or here. And you can sign up for the conference. It's going to be 2 days. The first day is going to be about workshops, and the second day is about talks. You can already see the whole schedule and all the speakers there as well. It is a paid conference, even though it is online. But if you buy tickets to this conference now, you have tickets for the conference from next year on a physical location, we hope, at least. So please go there. And if you have any questions, please talk to us on Discord. This is a map of all the ServerlessDays communities, conferences, and meetups around the globe. So if you want to help, if it is not present in your country, please let us know. We can help you around set up the community, and we can make this grow more and more. It's very, very fun to be around here. And this is our links that we're going to use tonight. So on the serverless, on the Twitter, you can find us on Serverless Ham. That's the link on Discord. So we will be using Discord for the Q&A if you want to meet the people that are attending the conference. Well, if you just want to talk to us, please use the Discord channel. That's the link to the invite. We are live on Twitch and on YouTube. So you can find us on both of those channels. And the conference on the October is going to be the same on the same way. You're going to use Discord for all the mingling and all the talking and chatting and questions. We're going to use Twitch and YouTube as well for the streaming. So I hope you can make it. I hope to see you all there on October. It's going to be pretty awesome. And for tonight, I would like to bring on stage, I can say that, to bring on stage, in this virtual stage. Before I bring Marek, Teresa, if you have any words that you'd like to say, please.
Yeah, I'm super excited now. It's the first time for me, and I think for Jojo as well, that we do a live meetup, a live streaming thing. And yeah, we are trying all the tools and excited to try this out and see how it goes. And yeah, we hope to talk to some of you in our Discord channel.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and if you have any feedback on how the live stream goes, please let us know, because we're going to be adjusting for the conference as well. So yeah, I'd like to bring Marek. He's going to talk about this Cloud Development Kit, the CDK. And yeah, let me bring him into this stage. So cool. Hello there, Marek.
Hey, good evening. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for the invite. So yeah, super happy to be here. And let me just go ahead and share my screen, and we can kick off, yeah?
Cool. Yeah. Enjoy, Marek. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you too. Enjoy as well.
I'm gonna remove myself now. You can have this stage for yourself.
Awesome. And you can see my screen properly as well, right? I lost you on audio real quick, but believe my screen is being shared. So
there you go.
There we go. Good. Yeah. So thanks everyone for attending actually this presentation, and also for actually the invitation to speak in Hamburg. Even though I'm not in Hamburg myself, it's for me very encouraging to actually see all of these small serverless communities that are actually growing, that are getting more active. And by means of introduction, so you already saw my name is Marek Kuczynski. I'm a serverless solution architect at AWS, which means that I work on serverless full time. And as a serverless solution architect, there's actually a couple of things that I do. So I work quite closely with a lot of customers on training, on education on serverless. As many as you know, serverless does require a bit of a different mindset. You need to start thinking about event-driven architectures and those type of things. So that's one of the things that I do. I also work very closely with customers, mainly in Western Europe, I would say, on any feature requests that they may have specifically on the AWS platform. Any roadmap questions, any technical challenges that they encounter. I'll be talking today about something that's, that people don't directly associate with serverless. So that's going to be the CDK, which is one of the ways that you can deploy infrastructure as code on AWS. But in case there's any questions about, tonight's content, the CDK, about serverless, about AWS, or anything else like that, feel free to just send me a DM at my Twitter handle, which you can see over there. Always more than happy to help you with anything connected kind of to the space that I'm in. And maybe as a bit of a small side note, so why I'm also super happy to be here is the fact that I've been working together with the fine people of ServerlessDays Amsterdam. So, super happy again to also see that Hamburg and Berlin are growing a little bit. I would also in that sense encourage you, take also a look sometimes at ServerlessDays Amsterdam. We host these type of meetups as well. We're not competing with each other. We're all friends, and we're all doing kind of the same thing. So, even though we're far apart from each other due to COVID and cannot see each other, it still feels like a nice and big family that we can still, speak to each other and actually reach out to each other maybe a little bit easier than we could before. But anyway, enough build up, enough introduction. Let me start actually giving you a bit of an expectation what it is I want to talk to you about in this session. So I've done the introduction already. I want to take a couple of minutes to also explain a bit what is infrastructure as code. I expect that, most people have heard of it or maybe are using it already in production. But I want to kind of give you a bit of an overview of, what's actually really the point of it and what are also some of the different mechanisms that you might have for infrastructure as code. After that, we'll dive into, what is actually the CDK itself then. It is a project, for those of you that maybe never heard of it, that's been around for like roughly 1 year. So it's been a year or so that is generally available. But I also want to make sure that I kind of explain the basics there. And then on top of that, also what the actual benefits are, right? So kind of my hidden agenda over here is to make you very enthusiastic about it. And, hopefully it'll give you kind of the right context to maybe take a look at it. If it's not your thing, at least you'll be able to tell a bit, how is it different maybe for the tooling or the solutions that I'm using today. And then towards the end of the presentation, I'll actually, focus it a little bit back again on the serverless part. So I'll show you and I'll also describe to you a little bit how you can use the solution to build either Lambda functions or how you can use it to create Fargate containers, right? So even though it's a serverless meetup and I'm a serverless guy, I'll try to make it a bit interesting and a little bit broader than just talking about functions as well. And, I'll share a bit of tips and tricks where you can find more, what other events are in this space. And, we'll then also make sure to answer all of your questions in the Q&A. Like Jojo and Teresa already mentioned, you can already submit your questions on Discord. So since this is a live talk, I cannot directly reply to them. Maybe others can pick it up already, but we'll definitely make sure that towards the end of the talk, we'll go to, all of your questions as well, and that we can do some sort of follow-up as well in case there's something more complex for us to discuss. Yeah, so with kind of that agenda being set, let's dive into actually the infrastructure as code part, and let's just take a bit of a holistic view at what it is and why we should be thinking about it. So in this section, what I've actually done in the next couple of minutes is we've kind of started thinking a bit about, what are some of the levels of maturity that people can actually, deploy cloud resources? How can they start using it? And we've divided it up in kind of like 3 levels that I'll walk you through in just a minute, where kind of level 0 is, the lowest level of maturity. And we'll build it up to like kind of, more advanced methods that kind of like allow you to maybe develop faster, and also, just be basically more effective. At the end of the day, even though I'm very much a technology person, I realized that kind of, what is the benefit of the cloud? Besides all of the awesome technology and all of the awesome services that come out every day, it's at the end of the day, I think the goal for many organizations to move to the cloud is really to accelerate faster, to basically delight their customer in a better type of way. So in that sense, also think a bit about, from this perspective, when it comes to maturity, what are basically like kind of the best ways for me to develop, and how can I basically get to, better business results as soon as possible? Let's start with level 0, kind of like how probably everyone who started working with the cloud, whether it was years ago or just recently, we've all been there, that we started creating infrastructure by hand, right? And in the context of cloud, we typically mean by that there's someone that logs into the AWS or Azure or Google console, that doesn't really matter. And basically within that console by hand starts deploying and developing their applications, right? This works pretty well to some extent. You can already see that once you have maybe different developers that are working on a particular project, at a certain point, this will start becoming more complex to maintain, right? So what many organizations kind of take as the next step, once they start figuring out that, maybe doing all of these things, these repetitive steps or kind of error-prone steps by hand, is they start thinking, how can we start automating some of this, right? So how can we, on one side, remove some of the labor, but also, just kind of prevent any human errors or whatever. And what's kind of then a very natural step to take is to start thinking about how you can start to use scripting, right? So this could be PowerShell scripts, or it could be Bash scripts, or anything else like that. You will write those scripts, maybe keep them on a repository or in a central location. And once these scripts actually execute, they will then talk towards the SDK, right? Or basically they will make API calls on your behalf. And that's then the way that you can start developing infrastructure, right? So it's already a little bit better than the console. But there are, again, it's not the silver bullet either when it comes to development, right? So even though you've reduced some of the manual labor and you've made it a bit more repeatable to deploy an application, what's kind of the downside of a scripted approach? There's still quite a lot of boilerplate, right? And by that I mean just you will need to maybe make if then else loops. You will kind of like create some logic in there. What do I deploy? In what order do I do that? That's kind of like one of the things that you can typically overcome. Where I think things start really getting tricky are whenever things start failing, right? So what actually happens if I'm maybe deploying a web server and I need to also have a bucket for that and a load balancer and whatever? How can I kind of like recover from maybe a failure, an API command that somewhere halfway failed or something like that, right? So you can kind of see where scripting kind of becomes a little bit difficult there. And you have kind of similar type of challenges also when it comes to, multiple people working together on one stack. What actually happens if the stack is already deployed? Someone runs the script to run it again. Will it do nothing? Will it try to redeploy it? Will you even potentially, as the last bullet says, have any race conditions, right? So scripting is kind of an okay solution, but usually not really something that you're looking for to in production either. So we're going to crank it up another level, right? As people started learning, as people started getting more mature with the cloud, a couple of mechanisms and more mature concepts came out as well, right? And these are typically the ones that we call declarative infrastructure, right? And by declarative infrastructure, what we basically mean is that unlike with the scripted approach that we were talking about earlier, you already have tools that are tailored a little bit more towards cloud deployments, right? So they will have a couple of abstractions in there. They might have things like, sane defaults that they assume whenever you don't specify them. And basically these tools are, make kind of the infrastructure as code deployment, especially with multiple people, again, a little bit better, right? So I've listed a couple of them here. It's definitely by no means a complete list. But if you take a look at kind of like the AWS ecosystem, you could think about CloudFormation, which is kind of like, by now a service that we've had for ages, which, has helped a lot of customers to create infrastructure as code on our platform. If you take a bit of a look at, a very popular alternative that can be used on other platforms as well, you could take a look at something like HashiCorp Terraform, right? Which is conceptually kind of does the same type of thing, right? It's basically around specifying your infrastructure in a template that's already at a bit of a higher abstraction layer, then kind of having a processor in there that can start executing that against SDKs, and at the end of the day, basically create the infrastructure. And, to give you kind of like a couple of other benefits of what this declarative infrastructure tuning can do as well, it is, for example, also better when it comes to kind of like debugging or maybe making, like incremental changes to a stack, right? So there is typically within all of these tools, there is some intelligence in there where they can, for example, compare what is it that you have defined in your stack, what is it that you actually have in production, and what is kind of the quickest way to fix those differences and basically get the stack to where you want to be, right? That's kind of the space where what we're talking about here. I'll dive in super quick, even though I think for many people this will be familiar, but in case you've never seen a CloudFormation template, this is kind of what it looks like, right? So it's basically a whole bunch of YAML code or JSON code. Typically, years ago, I would say that this was kind of like the only way for many people to start developing in the cloud. And we kind of like accepted the fact that, we would have to specify all of these various resources to much detail. I think that if you start looking at infrastructures today, especially the ones that are maybe using containers or functions and, many microservices, many managed components, what you'll actually notice is that kind of this approach of CloudFormation is getting way too verbose, right? So before your application would even run, you would have to specify all of these components, right? And you can see it, for example, here, VPCs, whether it should have DNS support, subnets, which AWS region should it be in, and all that type of stuff. That's actually, a lot of boilerplate that you still need to specify before you have a stack running. So it's reliable, it works. It is a ton of information, though, that you need to kind of put in, and a ton of knowledge and cognitive load that you also need to start actually developing your applications. So a couple of years ago, from AWS perspective, we've realized this was a problem. This was still pre-CDK, which is going to be, of course, the star of the night that I'm going to get to in just a minute. But the serverless application model, you can kind of see, it's an abstraction or like a kind of like a dialect that we've put on top of CloudFormation, whereas CloudFormation is actually the super verbose way where you can basically build any applications and specify any detail on how the stack should look. The serverless application model is actually much more simplified, right? So it is a, kind of like I was saying, a dialect or kind of like a simplification of CloudFormation. So what you would typically do is you would embed, for example, this code snippet in your CloudFormation template. But the benefit of that is that you actually, you have to specify a lot less codes to basically get the same result as you would get with CloudFormation. So the example that you see over here, this is actually in order for you to create a DynamoDB table, so just a NoSQL table and a Lambda function, which would be the compute part that, for example, could talk to that database. And you can see that, within like roughly 20 lines of code, we first of all would go ahead and define the function itself. Where is the source code stored under the code URI part? What is the runtime? So for example, in this case, we want to actually do it with Node.js 12. What kind of policies does it need? We go ahead and then on the lower half, under the events section, we specify what the API should do, right? And this is actually enough for us to create a fully configured API gateway, which can immediately start receiving and sending out messages towards the Lambda. And then actually kind of like probably the best way actually to show the abstraction and kind of the power of SAM is on the bottom part, right? So if I want to have just the most simple DynamoDB table with just kind of like the default capacity settings and all that stuff, I can do that in 2 lines of code, right? So that's kind of like where, SAM fits in and just to give you a couple of ideas on what some of the abstractions are that you can actually take kind of on level 2. So now let me show you actually kind of what, now that I've showed you kind of like, the manual, the scripting approach, and also what kind of the tooling is there to create your infrastructure as code, I want to talk to you about the new kid on the block, right? So what is kind of the CDK thing that you might have seen people talk about and that I'm also somewhat enthusiastic about? I'm going to show you what all the hype is about and what this actually can mean for you, right? So what is kind of the same with the CDK as with the other options that I showed you before is that this is, similarly to the other options, this is talking towards the AWS SDKs on your behalf. And at the end of the day, the intent really is to create infrastructure as code, fully fledged applications, the infrastructure and the source code itself in a reliable and repeatable way, right? The main difference is really on kind of like the programming interfaces that you have and some of the abstractions that are available within the CDK that basically allow you to accelerate this a lot faster. So to make this a bit more specific, unlike with some of the other languages, what's different about the CDK is that you can actually use a familiar programming language, such as, for example, Node.js or Python or, for example, .NET, to actually define the infrastructure that you want to create, right? So you saw, for example, with CloudFormation and with SAM, that we would end up with YAML-like templates, right? Which are, you can get the hang of it. I can, for example, nowadays, after a couple of years of exercise, I can kind of do these YAML templates. I can write them pretty much, with my eyes closed. I still make a lot of mistakes, but typically I get pretty far. What is pretty cool about the CDK, looking at this example at the top, is that I can choose to use either Node.js, Python, or .NET, as I was saying before, right? So I don't need to learn really any new skills. I can already use kind of the programming skills that I have available in order to start constructing my app. Of course, what you kind of see here on the bottom, so I would on the top part with the CDK app, that's kind of the description of my infrastructure, what all of the various components are that I want to have. And then on the bottom part, of course, I can, just as with other infrastructure as code tools, I can directly include my source code as well, right? So it could be a Lambda function, it could be a Docker container, it could even be maybe some sort of Ansible scripts or anything else like that you might need to deploy on your instances, functions, or containers, or anything else like that. So this is kind of like one of the big, I think, benefits of CDK is just, the fact that you kind of from a cognitive perspective can, for example, if you're really good with Python or Node.js, you can keep within that ecosystem as well, right? And you will be able to develop basically exactly the same as if you were to choose another programming language. To dive in maybe to a couple of other benefits, because you might be thinking like, so what, cool. So I don't need to use YAML. I like YAML. Why should I use actually like a programming language? Well, let me show you maybe kind of like compelling reason number 2. And that's the part where I want to talk a little bit more about what so-called constructs are, right? And whenever we speak about constructs, we basically mean abstractions that are present within CDK itself that actually allow you to define, either a component, a service, or a fully fledged infrastructure with just a couple of lines of code. So imagine, I don't know, some of you probably have done this maybe in CloudFormation. For some of you, this might be new. But if you think a little bit about the example that I was giving before, where you would need to create a VPC, right? So you would need to create subnets, routes, maybe a net gateway, maybe an internet gateway, all type of components that are basically required before you can put in that instance, that EC2 machine, for example, into a VPC and make it talk to a database or whatsoever else. The nice thing with the CDK is actually that we can deprovision all of these type of components, so combined over multiple services for you already. And in the example that, for example, of a VPC, so this is a Node.js example that you see here on the top, I could just simply specify, VPC is new EC2 VPC, give it a name, specify, for example, how many availability zones, so how many data center facilities are needed. And whenever I actually will do it, the CDK will extend this one line of code that I have automatically for me into 270 lines of CloudFormation that I didn't have to do. So one of the things maybe I didn't mention properly before, the CDK is actually, it's kind of like a processor, kind of like a compiler, where you can take all of this simple code all of this code that you write in the language that you chose, and we will actually on the background, within the CLI, we will extend that towards good old CloudFormation that can then be deployed towards the cloud, right? So again, this is, in my opinion, it's maybe not the most serverless example, because serverless people typically frown a little bit on VPCs, right? Why do you need VPCs unless you maybe have a database? But this is probably, one of the most compelling examples that I know. just the sheer amount of code that you can save, right? That you don't have to write, that you don't have to maintain, that cannot become kind of like a liability that can break. To me, that's magical, right? So the first time that I actually saw this, that's kind of when I started getting what the fuss was about CDK. The other thing, and I've hinted already a little bit of this already, so we have 4 languages available today that you can actually write your CDK code in. So those are Python, Java, .NET, and TypeScript. And all of these languages, it doesn't really matter which one you pick. They're all equal citizens, right? So they all have the same capabilities. We all have documentation for them. And, it's going to be, of course, a little bit tweaked towards how, for example, classes are called in Java and, what some of the conventions are. So you'll obviously see some differences between, coding conventions or something like that. But functionality-wise, whether you pick one of these languages to create doesn't really matter. You can always go towards one of the web pages that we have where these are documented. Just simply go towards the language that you're using and find basically examples and also code that you could start using to define your application. So, having said that, let me show you just very briefly in kind of like a demo how this works, and also how I feel personally that the developer cycle kind of creating infrastructure as code is actually much faster with something like the CDK compared to some of the tools that we've had for a little bit longer. And in this case, what I'll be doing is I've thought what's kind of like the simplest serverless example that I'll do. So I'll just provision a very simple API gateway with a Lambda function. In case you're interested, you can actually follow along with the source code. So on my GitHub, which you can find the link on the bottom of the screen, you can actually find the source code for something very similar that I'm going to be doing now. So I can show you maybe really quick. So if you wanna go along, you can definitely do that with me as well. So let me just show you a bit how to actually approach this. And in this case, I'm gonna actually just create a sample from scratch. So we'll create just a folder called CDK Meetup. I'll just crank up my, not sure how big your screens are at home, but I'll just make it as big as possible that you can pretty easily read it as well. And now that we have this, we've gonna just show you kind of like what the first steps are whenever you start creating these type of steps, so that you can go ahead and follow along at home as well. So I've already went ahead and installed the CDK command line. So this is something that you can easily retrieve, for example, from Brew or whatever package manager that you might be using. And this is kind of like the client-side tooling that will actually help me to validate my template, but also start deploying it towards AWS. And whenever I want to create an initial stack, I would go ahead and type something like CDK init. I can then, in order to initialize the stack, I can then actually specify the language as well that I want to use. I'm mostly familiar with Python, so I'll just use the Python example over here. And whenever I run this command, it will actually go ahead and create a couple of files for me automatically within that directory. You can also see that it, for example, creates a virtual environment for Python, so that some of the dependencies that I will be needing are also managed a little bit more cleanly and not on my machine itself. But actually after running the CDK ls command, we can see that a couple of files were created for us automatically. So there's a couple of setup files, a couple of requirements files. I would encourage you, take a bit of a look in case you're interested at what these files are doing. Most of them are actually just kind of for metadata, right? So they will, for example, say, what are some of the versions, which version of CDK was used to create this stack? What are some of the dependencies that are needed? And a couple of other bootstrap scripts that might be needed in order to provision this on a new machine. The most interesting part actually that we need to worry for now is actually this component over here that's called the CDK Meetup stack, right? So that's the component that I just did a small listing on top of. You can see, and this is actually where I'll switch to just having it in a text editor. So I'll just, let me just make this a bit smaller so that I can edit this text as well. So this is the text that actually was just generated for me by CDK, right? This is kind of like the boilerplate code that I needed to have available. There's nothing too fancy in here, right? But this is kind of like where as it's saying here on line 9, from here on, I can actually start defining my stack. So one of the first steps that I would be doing, and I'll cheat, You can all see me cheat over here. I'll just cheat a little bit by copying over the dependency so that I don't create a typo in here. I'm going to be needing a couple of dependencies for the various services that I'm going to be needing, right? So as you saw in my example, I want to use API Gateway and I want to use Lambda. So those are actually the libraries that I'm importing over here, in a very standard way, I would say, for how we typically would create in Python, right? So these are packages that you can actually retrieve using pip or any other Python package manager that you might have available, right? So that's great. We now have these libraries available for these components. Now we can actually go ahead and start just basically creating our infrastructure. So I'm going to define, first of all, a Lambda function. I'll just give it Lambda func as a name, because I know that's not one that's reserved or that's going to cause any issues. And one of the things that I absolutely love actually about both CDK and probably VS Code equally is this autocomplete option that you see right now on my screen already, right? So I basically will now start kind of defining my infrastructure, and I will, for example, say, okay, I want to create a Lambda function. Whenever I actually open this up, it should give me, I'll need to reference it to self, which is one of the kind of constructs that I need to have available there. I know from the top of my head also that I need to give it a friendly name, right? And from here on, actually, I can start basically adding all type of properties for this Lambda function. So, for example, I will be needing to, let me just take a look at my cheat sheet. I need to, for example, specify the runtime over here, right? So the function itself, what am I doing wrong here, perhaps? Yeah, it should be AWS Lambda self. But for example, there will be a runtime that I need to specify over here. Might have made a small typo, so I'll just cheat a little bit and copy this over. Right, I see what I did. I should have selected function. So I need to, for example, specify the runtime over here, which should autocomplete for me right now. And the nice thing here actually is that the runtime will also be auto-completed for me, right? So I should be able to say just AWS Lambda runtime, and then, for example, I can, from the list that I see over here, I can specify something like all of the available runtimes over here, right? So if I'm even not entirely sure what the various Python options are, I can actually immediately from this editor where I'm defining my code, I can immediately see what the options are available, right? So I can just kind of like autocomplete and tap my way through until I have a fully working example available. I'll also need to specify something like, for example, the code, right? So the code will be, for example, where the source code is stored. So from the top of my head, I think it's something like AWS Lambda.code. And I think it's then from asset, I believe, where I could then specify, that I want to use the .lambda folder locally. If I want to do something like a timeout, for example, I can specify that over here as well. So this will be something like, I need to actually look this up, sorry about it. I tend to forget the syntax sometimes, but the timeout is actually not under the AWS Lambda, it's actually under core duration seconds tree, right? So there are a couple of things that you may need to look into the documentation. You can see that, I know this looks horrible because I got the resolution a little bit cranked up, but you can kind of tooltip over here, sometimes find it through the documentation. You can also look at some of the documentation pages that we have available, for example, over here, where, as I was mentioning to you already, you can immediately zoom into the Python documentation. You can see what all of the various classes are that are available there. And you can basically start constructing your application in this type of way, right? So, for example, for a Lambda function, I would need to specify at the very least what is the runtime, what is the code, what is the timeout. I will also need to specify things like, for example, what is the memory limit. And once I actually do that, I can then start and try to deploy it. So let me actually skip the memory setting for now and just show you very quickly how this would work for API Gateway, right? So in case of API Gateway, I'm going to actually select AWS API Gateway. We're going to over here, let me just take a look. So over here, we need to actually select the Lambda REST API. So the Lambda REST API is actually the RESTful version of the API that we want to deploy. We would also go ahead and create just a reference to self. We will give it a friendly name, such as API Gateway. And then actually over here, what we would want to do, and this is another abstraction that's pretty straightforward when it comes to CDK, is we need to give a reference basically towards the handler that will be invoked, right? So basically, this API gateway needs to know which function is it that we need to start invoking. And in this case, we can actually, if I'm not mistaken, we can just reference it towards the, I'll just double check based on my cheat sheet. Yeah, we can just actually reference it immediately towards the Lambda function that we were creating, right? So this is in that sense, pretty straightforward. If you've ever configured, I'm sure some of you've done an API gateway by hand through the console. You know how tedious and how kind of like labor intensive this can become, right? With creating the mappings, with mapping the right Lambda function, with maybe even setting IAM permissions or anything like that. We actually take care of all that stuff for you automatically already with the CDK. Yeah. So this is still not just looking quickly at the time, this is a pretty functional example, but I want to make sure that I could actually show you a full deploy and also what happens underwater. And since I didn't include the Lambda yet, I'll just quickly switch to the stack that I had shared already also on GitHub, just to save a bit on time. So you can see actually over here, it's a little bit more complete. But I wanted to show you a little bit what happens whenever I would deploy this somewhat more complete stack. So a couple of the things that I've done here is I've specified the memory size, retry attempts. I've also enabled things like tracing, reserved concurrent executions, and I could do it live on you for the screen, but want to make sure that we get to some of the other components over here as well. So let me just in 2 minutes show you what kind of the deployment process is once I have a fully functioning stack, such as the one that I have here on my screen. So first of all, I could actually use something like the CDK diff command, or actually let me show you first maybe the CDK synth command, which is the synthesize command. And I should actually do this in the correct folder. And what we actually do with synth is we can automatically, you remember kind of the example I was showing you a couple of minutes ago, where we could specify a VPC in one line of code and extend that to 270 lines of code. The synthesize command, so the one that I just ran over here, basically does the same thing, right? So you can kind of see, to make maybe a bit of a fair comparison, the Hello World stack that I've pre-created it has, let me see, 30 lines of code, which is, not too bad. That's still pretty overseeable. If we actually extend it towards, full CloudFormation, and we do a word count on that one, we will see that it's 396 lines of code, right? So you already kind of see that, even though, and this is, nothing against CloudFormation as a service, it's awesome, it's super reliable and whatever. But I think the fact that, kind of like a simple stack like the one that I was showing you before, right, which seemingly just has kind of like two very simple components, right? You would think like this is just super simple to set up. How much work could it be? You actually see that within CDK, it's pretty simple to do, right? You could do something like this probably in 10 or 15 minutes if you get the hang of it. Once we start actually extending it, it's a scary, nearly 400 lines of code already for just something so simple as the thing that we've created here. So, now that we've kind of like, we can, of course, some customers actually use the synthesize command also kind of like as an escape path, you could say. So what is completely valid is to, for example, use CDK just for generation of templates, and to then, for example, pick up this template, maybe include it in your CI/CD pipeline or anything else like that, right? You don't have to use the full CDK tool set. You can also just use components kind of it and, deploy and run the infrastructure as you want to. But in this case, what I'll actually want to do is I want to start deploying it through CDK itself as well, right? That's kind of like the developer experience that we typically have in mind. And also kind of like the simplest way for you to do it, because then you just need to, write your code, use the CDK SDK, and that gives you basically the capabilities to, within one environment, immediately start pushing things towards the cloud. So in order to do that, actually, I would just go ahead and run simply something like CDK deploy, right? This command will actually take a look at the local credentials that I have stored on my machine. I'll make the screen a little bit smaller because there's actually a lot of text that's going to be shown here. Unfortunately, maybe a little bit difficult to read. Don't try to fully grasp it. What basically the CDK will first of all do for me once I start doing a deploy is it will kind of give me like a warning, right? Like, hey, you're now going to start deploying this stack. These are kind of some of the IAM changes that I'm going to do. just be aware and kind of give me explicitly approval to do these type of things, right? So sure, we're a demo. We want to show actually how this works. So we will just go ahead and press OK. And what actually will be happening now is that, locally on my machine, CDK already did the translation from my Python code towards CloudFormation. And it's now basically picking up and starting to deploy CloudFormation in the background, right? So you can already, I'll crank it up just a little bit. You can see already that it's creating a CloudFormation stack, right? And once that CloudFormation stack is actually there created, it will go ahead and create all of those resources that are fully needed for my stack for me automatically, right? So IAM policies, API Gateway, Lambda, any event triggers and those type of things. And you can actually see already very quickly over here that for this very simple stack, it's already 18 distinct things that it needs to deploy, right? So while it's actually doing that, to show you also it's a live demo, I can kind of show you that over here actually. So within my AWS console where I'm logged into to CloudFormation, I already see that the stack is already being deployed, right? So the Hello World CDK stack. And this is basically kind of from where we can monitor, of course, the progress here over the CLI, right? Which will take typically something like 1 or 2 minutes. And also within CloudFormation itself, we can actually go how the process is, right? So that's kind of like in kind of like a helicopter flight where the CDK fits in and how you could actually go ahead and, in my opinion, in a much faster way, start creating and deleting infrastructure as well. All right. This demo will go ahead and start deploying. We can maybe it already finished, by the way. Else, just as evidence, I can flip back in a minute and show you that it actually deployed, right? And that's maybe also a nice thing to see actually if it did. I've rehearsed it, so I've tested it. I've used it in another presentation, but it's always encouraging to still see. There we go. Create complete. I get to keep my job another day. Good stuff. So jokes aside, let's continue with the content. Now that I showed you a bit the demo, and I want to also just give you a bit of the a bit of an overview what else you can do with CDK, right? So everything that I've been talking about so far has been very AWS minded. But the CDK actually can be used more broadly as well, right? So one of the things, and this might be a little bit mind-blowing for some people with all of these various abstractions that we've been talking about, but one of the recent integrations that we've actually been working together with our friends from HashiCorp, right, which is one of those providers that actually creates infrastructure as code tooling as well, which is still used by many of our customers. We've worked together with them, actually, the CDK team, and we've also created an integration that allows you to use CDK. So the same kind of programming construct that I showed you earlier, to create Lambdas or API Gateway or whatever, you can actually use those same type of constructs also to generate Terraform code, right? So the output then would be, instead of CloudFormation, like I showed you before, it will be Terraform. And using that Terraform template, you can actually do basically exactly the same things that you could do with Terraform tooling as well. So you could do a plan, you could do a deploy, you could ingest it maybe in the existing CI/CD tooling already. In this case, actually, CDK just basically kind of like, I wouldn't say kind of like prevents you from having to maybe learn HCL or any of the Terraform constructs. You could use basically the same convenience that you have with CDK. So this is awesome. Another trend that we're also seeing, so one trend, a little bit more AWS related, is that there's also a couple of extensions specifically for AWS services. So one of them is, for example, CDK 8S, which some people call CDK Skates or CDK K8S for Kubernetes. Basically CDK for Kubernetes to prevent any flame wars. And what that actually allows you to do is to both create the infrastructure, including VPCs and instances and whatsoever, but also your Kubernetes config, right? So all those type of things that you might be defining in Helm charts maybe, or in other properties that you need to specify on the Kubernetes cluster, you can also start using actually CDK for that and do that end-to-end. So infrastructure, Kubernetes configuration, Docker containers, and all that stuff. That's another option that's available. And then kind of like the third option that I think is still kind of like the freshest one, but where I do see a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of development as well, is that some folks have actually also started using, CDK either through Terraform or with different integration to, for example, deploy towards other clouds, right? So I've seen that there's been folks that already started using CDK to deploy towards Google Cloud. I've seen also folks that started using it to deploy, for example, to Azure's AKS, so the Kubernetes service of Azure. And this is to me, I think, pretty exciting, right? Because in that sense, the tooling actually CDK, it's not necessarily AWS only, right? You can actually use it in a much more meaningful ways. And what my personal hope actually from this is that, at the end of the day, everyone will benefit from this project as well, right? So just as instrumental, I think Terraform has been and still is for a lot of customers to basically generate infrastructure as code. They were definitely, in my personal opinion, very much ahead a couple of years ago when they came out with that project. I hope that CDK kind of will have that same type of role as kind of like maybe the glue and kind of like a uniform language that we can use to actually, write as least as possible YAML and JSON and very specific infrastructure over as well. So, that's just to give you a bit of an idea why, from AWS perspective, CDK is super interesting. But even if you're not using AWS, I would encourage you to take a look at either what Terraform is doing or what some of these community projects are doing as well. And I'll have more information on events and where to find towards the end of my talk as well. Cool. So let's continue to the next session. We're still not done. And we're going to actually, I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into what actually some of the abstractions are, right? So some of you might already be sold on CDK and think this is the best thing since sliced bread. I'm going to give you a couple of reasons why I think it's awesome and something that you should investigate. And in this case, I'm going to do it to kind of in the context of both functions and containers, to keep it a little bit fresh and interesting as well, for those of you that might be using either of those technologies. So, this is a slide a little bit from AWS perspective, what we consider serverless. And it's a little bit my disclaimer in that sense, why I want to be talking about both Fargate and Lambda in the next, kind of like the next few minutes for a small demo as well on what I want to be building, right? So in my humble opinion, some people actually are sometimes thinking a bit like, serverless is only functions, serverless is only Lambda or anything like that. From our perspective, like this slide is trying to illustrate a little bit, both Fargate and Lambda are very serverless, right? Because what do these services have in common? They both abstract away a lot of the infrastructure and a lot of the heavy lifting that you need to do. The scaling and the payment is pay as you go. There's not that much ongoing maintenance that you need to do, whether you're using serverless containers with Fargate or whether you're using serverless functions with AWS Lambda, right? So that's kind of like my disclaimer or positioning a little bit why I want to be talking a little bit about both. Because actually, as a serverless architect, I tend to use typically the tool that is best suited for either my own requirement or for something that a customer is trying to solve, right? So kind of looking a little bit at this diagram, I typically try to stay as much as possible on the right-hand side of the screen, right? So basically, those services typically are the easiest to configure, maybe have the least amount of maintenance that I need to do. But in some cases, actually using containers and even Kubernetes or something like that might actually just be a much more sensible solution. So, when we look actually at some of the abstractions that are available for ECS, so ECS is kind of like the managed container service that we have available. In case you're maybe not so versed with AWS, it's somewhat comparison, I guess, to some of the managed Docker services or maybe Google's Cloud Run, where basically kind of the idea is that you can specify and upload a Docker image. And we will actually go ahead and host that Docker image for you automatically, right? With automated scaling available, with integration behind the load balancer, with setting up IAM policies, logging, and all that type of stuff, right? So that's kind of like my elevator pitch, I would say, of one of the serverless container services that we have available. And one of the things why I think this is also a great example that I wanted to bring up is that especially if you're using containers, there's kind of like different libraries and different constructs, as we call them, that you can use. So you can, as you can see here on the top side, you can use kind of like the standard ECS constructs, right? So these would be the modules that you use to, for example, create a cluster, create a container, create a task definition that specify how the container should run, and those type of things. There's also a ton of super useful ECS patterns. And these patterns are actually typically kind of combinations, you could say, of a fully fledged architecture. So instead of having to kind of cherry pick all of these type of components and orchestrate them together, glue them together, then try and deploy and hope that you got it right, you can actually take that to a higher abstraction layer and basically use something that, kind of like a blueprint architecture, where we filled in already the defaults and where we basically kind of try to make the user experience and the maintenance that you need to do for you as a user as simple as possible. I know this sounds a little bit blurry. I'm going to show you just in a couple of examples what this means. So, we've talked a little bit about Lambda. If we take a look at actually creating something like a container image, we can actually achieve many things by just including 2 lines of code as well, right? So the lines of code are in the kind of like dark blue bar on the top. In this case, we're actually looking at a TypeScript sample. But what we would need to do there is basically, if we want to create a standard container image, we specify first of all that we import ECS, right, on the first line, and afterwards we can actually, just with one command say ECS container image from asset. We specify where actually our Docker file, so just the file with all of the various Docker commands is specified. And what this will actually do automatically for us if we were to deploy it towards the cloud is it will build the Docker file. So it will do that locally on my machine. It will upload it to a container registry, right, where actually the container can be retrieved whenever it's needed to run on AWS. And that's basically it, right? So we've done kind of like all of these steps that we have on the bottom that might, be kind of like something that you do with a bash script, or you might do them manually. We've now automated this part just with 2 lines of code. Awesome. Let's crank that up a little bit, right? So what if we actually want to create a cluster? So we want to, we have our images already, but we now need to have kind of like a cluster and start defining how we want to scale these serverless containers. We could do that, of course, with Fargate, right? So that's typically what I see that most customers are choosing, because they then don't need to patch, scale, maintain the container clusters themselves. In case we wanted to, for example, use EC2 instances because it's cheaper, or because we need GPUs, or we have any other requirement that we do that, no problem whatsoever. We make a couple of small modifications and we just basically specify then what the instance type should be. And, we deploy, and basically CDK will convert our project from Fargate to running on EC2, right? So you kind of get the idea how you could take something very simple as a basis over here, tinker a little bit with it, modify it, and kind of like in an incremental way start deploying it towards the cloud without having actually, hundreds of lines of code. Your templates can stay actually really clean, really simple, if you kind of know, which patterns and which abstractions to use whenever you start making these trade-offs on while you're building it. Some of the more advanced examples are things like where you can actually deploy, for example, even things, a full cluster, including load balancers, including containers, including all of the VPCs, and probably like 5 or even more other services that I forgot to mention. And this is for me personally, to give you also a little bit of a step back. I'm super enthusiastic about CDK today. I was initially, when it came out, a little bit of a skeptic, right? So I didn't really see the value. I was, and I still am, to be honest, a huge fan of the serverless application model that we talked a little bit about before. But I mean, if you take just a bit of a look at how little code it can take to create something like a fully fledged infrastructure with load balancers, containers and all that type of stuff, this is almost magic to me, right? Just the fact that we can really start focusing on creating better applications, and we don't have to hassle too much with infrastructure. So let me now, now that I've taken a bit of a side step towards containers, let me actually show you how one of my customers based out of the Netherlands actually, has used CDK as well quite successfully to overcome one of the challenges that they had. And this is also a nice story actually where, that kind of shows that containers can also be friends with functions, even though it sometimes feels like, people are a little bit in the container camp or in the function camp. I love to be in both, right? And I'll say it honestly, even though my title says serverless, right? So might be some colleagues watching and might have some explaining to do, but to be honest, I just like to solve problems and I like to use either technology for that. So the case actually, and this is also one where you can find the full source code on my GitHub in case you're interested. So one of the use cases as a serverless solution architect that, often customers give me a question about is, especially when many of my customers start using Lambda and they're very happy because it's, it's cheaper for them, it scales, and, it works perfectly. Where sometimes Lambda can become a little bit challenging is maybe if you're hitting kind of like the limits, right, of what is possible. So Lambda functions, for example, can run for up to 15 minutes. They have 3 GB of memory. And if you're picking kind of like the right use case, so it's, for example, event-driven enough, and the operations can complete within that time, and it's actually cost-effective as well compared to running a container 24/7, the Lambda is often a very good solution. So one of the ways actually that I started learning about CDK, and where also one of my customers fortunately found a solution within the CDK stack itself, is actually using kind of containers as a fallback for functions, right? So my customer in this case had a SQS queue where they would receive all type of notifications for media that they needed to convert, right? So the customer actually, needs to do all type of video conversions. They need to do image conversions. They need to do, video translations. And it's basically kind of like a company that receives a lot of data on S3. They then need to process it in the quickest way possible, and then basically deliver the redefined content back to their customer, right? That's kind of like, in a nutshell, the process that they are doing. We were hitting the limits with Lambda, right? So at a certain point, we figured out that 3 GB really wasn't enough. We sometimes would actually hit also that the functions wouldn't complete within 15 minutes because it was like a very heavy media process that we needed to do. They were also starting to do things like running, for example, FFmpeg, which is also like a more, fancy tool that you can do video conversions with and those type of things. So we actually found it that, with CDK, we had our stack fully defined within CDK, including buckets and all of the various components that are necessary. And we then actually with CDK managed to simply replace this component that was being used with Lambda before, that actually, was kind of just not the right fit for us anymore because it would time out or not work for us anymore. We actually managed to pretty much simply carve that out, put the ECS container in there, and basically all of the problems were gone, right? So we just kind of like replaced one service for a better one. I still, in all clarity as well, I love Lambda, and it's probably, the service that I still work with most with day to day. But actually, this use case kind of proves to me as well that, it can be, you should always be kind of critical of, are you solving kind of the challenges of you or your customers in the best type of way? Is there maybe a simpler way if you can actually replace your function with a container? Maybe it's cheaper. Maybe you already have a Docker file. Maybe there's some sort of other reason, right? Maybe you're just more comfortable using Docker files. I think that in either case, with CDK, you have the full freedom to create all of it. Because basically within CDK, pretty much I wouldn't be able to give you a guarantee that every resource or every solution can be created. But pretty much all of the solutions, whether you're using, X-ray, logging, Fargate, it could even be SageMaker or machine learning, all of these deployments will be working in exactly the same type of way, the same way documented. And you could also start constructing these stacks in exactly the same way with auto-completion and all those type of things in place. So that's a little bit my small showcase. Another cool reason, I think, as well, why, as I'm calling it a little bit, functions work super well with containers as well, is the fact that you can, for example, have uniform tracing for them as well, right? So in the sample that I've given, and I don't want to go in too much detail further now. If you have any questions about it, always feel free to ping me, or we can maybe have a discussion in the Q&A as well. But one of the nice things there that you can maybe get inspired from a little bit too is the fact that traces are equal, right? So since I'm using, in this case, X-ray tracing, it could also be a third-party or commercial solution, maybe, Abstraction or Lumigo or any of these other type of solution, doesn't really matter. You can actually, whenever you start deploying it, you can also include this tracing in there and actually in a uniform way see exactly what your Lambda functions are doing, right? In this case, they're, for example, processing or submitting messages, how they're then flowing through that SQS queue, and how then, for example, ECS will actually start reading these messages out and doing all of these media conversions that I was mentioning about my customer, right? So this is another example that I think is pretty powerful and really got me over the ledge as well, that this was a super cool way to start developing infrastructure. All right. Let's bring it to the conclusion. So I'll just give a short recap and a couple of kind of like next items and things where you can learn more about, and then we'll flip it over to the Q&A. So hopefully by now, by my hopefully enthusiastic and somewhat entertaining talk, you've seen a little bit what CDK can do for you, right? So there's a lot of abstractions that it can take away from you, right? You see a couple of services over here. They're a bit more container oriented maybe than serverless, but hopefully gets the points across. But for example, we don't have to specify or really worry about things like security groups if these are already present in a construct. Things like ECR, which can be very tedious in order for you to upload or download container files. These are things that can automatically be created for us. The same thing goes for load balancers, as you saw in that load balancing example, right? So there's a lot of automation and a lot of basically, code that you don't need to develop or don't need to own in order for you to create fully fledged infrastructure. So that's kind of benefit number one. My second advice and kind of like reminder would also be, it does make sense, even though CDK makes development easier, always make sure that once you get started with it, to do a little bit your homework as well, right? So definitely take a good look at the documentation pages that we have. And, in that perspective, what this slide is also trying to show you is that there's kind of like two ways that you can go ahead and start creating your infrastructure. You can either kind of choose the option on the right side, where you go ahead and specify, a cluster, a capacity group, a task definition, and so on. There might also be, which is kind of the preferred approach, I think, a pattern already available that basically has all of these things bundled for you together, right? So also for the example that I was showing before about media conversion, where, we carved out Lambda with Fargate, I was actually using something like that SQS pattern that actually kind of like set up a lot of infrastructure for me already, right? So definitely do your reading on constructs and what's already available there, because it can simplify things even a little bit further for you. The other thing that's even a further abstraction on top of that is that we've also created kind of like a library where we store and maintain architecture patterns as well, right? We call this the AWS Solution Constructs. We've released it on June the 22nd, so it's still pretty fresh. And you can actually find, let me show you maybe on the next slide, what that kind of means is it's, again, a higher abstraction layer, right? You have already these patterns for ECS, for example. We're trying to actually extend this further with kind of like textbook blueprints, you could say, of common architectures that we either see being used internally within Amazon, or that our customers are using, or, that are kind of sensible for them to have as well. So you can definitely take a look there as well. We have our own catalog. There's also a couple of open source ones. So there's, for example, the CDK Foundation and a couple of newsletters and a couple of other events where you can learn more. So, take a look at this as well. In some cases, I've seen that already with one customer, that they actually managed to basically just find, similarly to how this picture is showing, two constructs that did exactly what they had to. They glued them two together, so they still had to kind of, where you see these double arrows, they still had to make a couple of modifications, but that was basically their app, right? So that saved them a tremendous amount of time, which I think is just amazing, because at the end of the day, we should be doing, writing better code, making new features or something like that. And no one really gets happy from writing CloudFormation templates, at least no one that I've known before myself. And then kind of like the last shout out that I want to give you as well, in case you want to learn more about it, and especially if I've talked very specifically about the AWS parts, but if you're interested maybe in the Terraform parts as well, or maybe you're working with Kubernetes and you're interested in CDK, CDK-S, CD Kubernetes, whatever you want to call it. There's going to be a free to attend CDK Day conference on the 30th of September. So this is a community-driven event. There's a couple of volunteers that are, basically figured that it would be very interesting to have a knowledge-sharing session by the community, for the community, about CDK. So in case you're interested about this, take a look at cdkday.com. You can claim your free ticket there, right? So we're going to be announcing the schedule sometime soon, hopefully this week or maybe next week. You'll see who the speakers are. But this is going to be a fantastic way for you to learn, on one side, how to use it on AWS. But I expect there will be material also how to use it with Terraform, or, maybe even with Azure or with Google. So there's, even if you're not an AWS customer, this is something I would recommend you to keep an eye out for. And yeah, that's it from my side. That's kind of what I wanted to share. I hope you found it useful and somewhat entertaining. Again, my name is Marek Kuczynski, Serverless Solution Architect at AWS. In case you have any technical questions, feel free to drop me a DM. My alias is over there. You can also, if you have a bit more complex question or anything like that, you can also shoot me an email at the address that is listed there below. And now I'm actually really going to hand it over to the Q&A. Thanks again. And I hope there's a couple of questions that I can take.
Nice. Thank you so much.
Marek. Cheers. Yeah. Hope it was good.
Nice. Yeah, it was.
Thanks a lot, Marek.
Yeah,
it was really great.
Yeah, I need to know if I can put you on the. Oh, I can make you the bigger one in the screen. Cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
Wow. It's still testing this thing out.
No,
thanks
sure.
so much, and thanks for the shout out on the CK Day as well. I was gonna send that link. I registered, I think, last week for that conference as well. I'm very excited to see that happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
We sent all the links in our Discord channel. So if you
amazing.
want to check out the GitHub repositories of Marek or the link to the conference, they are there.
Awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, and as a disclaimer, especially if you're sharing them, so it's probably not the prettiest code, right? I'm not the best coder. I'm a solution architect, which means that I'm kind of being paid mostly to whiteboard things and explain things. But hopefully people will find them useful, as you know, they're for me also in many cases kind of the way that I try to learn just by doing it. So happy if you have any improvements, ideas, questions about it, always feel free to reach out. So
cool. Yeah, I do have a question. We don't have any questions so far on the Q&A, but I do have one. Do you see people using CDK actually mixing with like not only the constructs that you have on the libraries, but it's actually like code? I don't know, because if you're using Python and JavaScript, you can actually go to a database, read how many clusters you should have, and use that number and create a new cluster, right? So you see people actually mixing with like other systems or other features on the language instead of just writing these constructs.
Sure. Yeah. No. Let me give you a couple of examples, and I didn't talk much about this. So one of the things that you can do, so you can absolutely write your own constructs, right? We have a lot of kind of the essentials are there. What you're starting to see right now is that, you know, there's coverage for pretty much every AWS service. Right now, we're a little bit at the stage, I think, where, you know, both AWS but also the community are starting to create these patterns and kind of starting to combine them, right? So that's definitely an ongoing thing that I think will always be going on. One of the examples that I've actually seen recently, and we had actually, I think, also a blog post about it, is from a company we're working in, Liberty Mutual. There are also some of the fine folks that are organizing, for example, CDK Day. And they actually started, if I'm not mistaken, so they've developed a ton of constructs on their own, right, that are just helpful for them as a customer. They also started publicizing a lot of them. So what's kind of interesting about that part is that this is a different way of open sourcing, right? We often think a bit of open source like, you know, contributing to the Linux kernel or contributing to Kubernetes or something like that. You can actually contribute to open source infrastructure development as well, which, you know, is I think a very interesting thing in itself. Whenever you actually start looking at, you know, integration of pipelines or how you could actually extend it, you know, you are using pretty much vanilla Python or Node.js or whatever whenever you start creating these stacks. So it is possible for you to kind of, like, you know, maybe do a lookup against your API or from a database or whatsoever. So it's possible. Where I personally, and I don't think we're at the stage yet where we maybe have a lot of best practices about it. I hope to see actually some of them, for example, on CDK Day. Where I would be probably a little bit too careful is not to go overboard too much with that. And what I mean by that is that, you know, if you're maybe a solo developer and you do that locally from your machine, and you can debug that quite easily, you know, you can probably kind of make a couple of modifications and maybe have a dependency on an API or something else like that. Where you can shoot yourself a little bit in the foot is if more people need to start using it and kind of like the CDK processor starts becoming a little bit less predictable, you could say, right? So yes, you can extend it, but what I think you don't want to do, and that's also the difference between the declarative and the imperative templates, right? Like, for example, with a YAML template, it kind of, you know, it's not great because you need to know a lot of syntax and it's kind of like verbose. But the nice thing is it is super predictable, right? Because it will run basically every time there. And if it's just not in the right syntax, it will just be rejected. With CDK, you can get a bit more creative, which can help you in some cases. It can also make things worse, if you know what I mean, right? If you have maybe too many funky libraries in there, or like an API lookup or anything else like that. So in my opinion, it's still kind of like, to be honest, that's also one of the things we're gonna, I think, talk about a bit about CDK at CDK Day, right? And other events. Maybe there'll even be a CDK meetup. I don't know. Based on the enthusiasm, I guess there will be. Yeah. But still very much work in progress, I think.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I do think now we're using, I think we're getting to the point that we're actually using real programming language to do infrastructure. Not that the other ones that we were using before weren't, but from the Terraform background, you have a very limited syntax with HCL, which is okay because you need to have this predictable and generates this predictable state on Terraform. But it's nice now that you can actually use Python. So you can do like all sorts of crazy stuff, which maybe not be the best thing, but you can do it.
Yeah. No, like I was mentioning already, HashiCorp is also very much involved with this. So it's actually quite interesting as well to, why should we create our own tooling and our own branding? We can be friends and work together on this area as well, which is, I think, just super exciting.
Nice. Cool. Yeah, we do have one question from Adrian on Scout. So he said, if you can clean out components of CDK, so if you can generate the CDK infrastructure from an existing AWS account, kind of like generate a template and run it into a new account. So can you like download your AWS account into CDK and rerun it in another account? I think the question is kind of something like that.
Yeah, I can talk a bit about that. So not today, not let's say in a clean way. I have seen it. So kind of like let me give you the AWS employee answer and kind of like what I know. So officially speaking, no, we don't have really any solutions for that, or I don't think it's really like a mature process to do it. I have seen a couple of attempts to, either based on kind of like the AWS console. So there is something, I think it's called the AWS Console Recorder. I can probably look it up in just a minute, or maybe people know about it. And there this is an unofficial way, but that one can kind of generate like a skeleton template based on the stuff that you have in there. In either case, even if you were either to the console or to the API, you would kind of like try to crawl or rebuild your application. My personal expectation is that you would get, to some extent you would be able to do it. There are a couple of things that you cannot really capture, right, in a CloudFormation stack, or that you cannot really capture in a SDK. So my approach would probably be try to see how much effort it is to actually define the stack from scratch, right? So kind of try to see, given kind of this, I made it look easy, but I also made something very simple. I don't know what it is that you're building. Maybe it's mega big and difficult to do. But I would probably just build it from scratch, just for the fact that you can then make sure that all of the properties are set in the correct way. It can also be an opportunity for you to actually simplify it. I haven't seen a lot of customers, kind of do an export successfully of it. But again, I would, and I'm going to trigger it by a question. Also, take a look if someone actually tried to do it, maybe with CDK, because we have very creative users of the platform, and people are trying all type of things. So not that I know, but who knows? Maybe there will be a solution one day.
All right. Thank you very much. Well, I think it's all of our questions. Do you have any, Teresa?
I don't have any questions. And people, if you're still watching and you are on our Discord channel, you can ask there, or you can ask on YouTube. We also get these messages here.
Yeah, that's perfect.
So there's still a minute for you.
Yeah, and if not, you can find Marek on Twitter. Join the Discord channel later, and
yeah. I'm going to hang around there. So yeah, feel free to, maybe people need to digest, right? There was a lot of content and I blasted it through. So maybe the good questions will come once it's settled a bit. But in either case.
They're trying it out.
Or that, yeah.
Okay, Adrian is talking about what kind of software components you use to stream this event. So yeah, for the stream,
I can answer that. You can do it too, right? So
you're using StreamYard to stream the event. So it's a web platform, and you can connect to the Twitch and YouTube accounts. And it's just a web. You just invite people, they come over, share their screen and their webcam, and you can just take people in and out. It's very, very easy to use. So yeah. I discovered like a week ago and you're using that, so that's quite nice. Cool. I think that's it for today. Thank you so much, Marek, for coming to the meetup.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. Yeah. Pleasure to beta test, and happy to definitely going to be keeping an eye out on the future events that you have, and also the conference soon, right? So that's the next big thing, I think. So definitely we'll be tuning in there too.
In exactly 1 month.
In a month, great, good stuff.
Yeah. Cheers.
All right. Hey, thanks so much. We'll be in touch.
Yeah?
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Cool. Yeah. So thank you very, very much for everyone to tuning into the ServerlessDays Hamburg today.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, and the conference, the ServerlessDays Hamburg conference, is going to be in the 1st and 2nd of October. You can find us on the Twitter, on Discord. You're going to see the link all over the place. And yeah, if you have any questions, just please join us and reach us, and we can help you around. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching.